dun.
Here we are, Vamos and me.
We
Vamos
are
and I.
live.
We are live. We are live.
Hey guys, good afternoon. This is Andy Shalef.
This is Bambos Charles Demetriou. And today we are with Donna. Let me pronounce the name right. We always have to check. Bearden. I believe that would be the pronunciation.
Donna Bearden.
Donna Bearden. And we're gonna be talking to Donna today about journaling because she has her new book, Finding More Me, and journaling to go soul deep, excuse me. And she is I've read the book. I've gotten through half of it, let's say, and I've really enjoyed it. So we're going to discuss for the hour about journaling to the soul on a wonderful chaos. Hello. Welcome. So Donna came through the back door into the show. And what that means is I got a message from John Kohler, who also published the last letter and The Wounded Healer.
Yeah.
And he said, listen, has her book. And every so often he'll send books out and say, could you guys give it a read and see how it connects? If you feel called to leave a quote or to do any sort of, testimonial for the book.
Yeah.
So I sometimes I'll look at them, sometimes I'll just skim, but I took a look at Donna's book, and all of a sudden I saw so much of me in her writing that I laughed and said, wow, so another one of me.
So we'll be interviewing the female version of you.
In some ways, except I think I've overcome sort of feeling like it's okay to look like an idiot, and I think she still has a little bit of struggle with just saying stupid things on the air.
Oh,
that would be my guess. Because when I asked and said, do you want to come on? She was a little bit anxious, and as I say over and over again, it's exactly the people that are a bit anxious that we want on, because those are the stories that don't often get heard, because the people that have something to say often they got there because they have pre-programmed answers.
Yeah, she was really sweet also, like the fact that she even shows up.
Yeah,
I love it.
And the thing that I loved about her book, right, and which I thought was really cool, was that, as you know, any self-help book tends to, when I see it, fall on one of two sides. One side is, I'm going to tell you all the things you need to do in order to find inner peace. Very instructing. Yeah. And the other one is a bit more like a spiritual journey, which is, so I'm not going to give you the tips and the tricks, but I'm going to share with you my journey and let you figure out what you want to make of it. And each one has their own benefit, and it appeals to their own demographic. But what Donna did was she really combined those two in a way that I also feel like I like to write, because I don't like to be too prescriptive in how I write and share my own journey. So she really took journaling and said, this is how journaling can benefit you. And then she went completely vulnerable with how she went through the practices and what she discovered through those practices. So that was really quite a beautiful journey, because you're really not only learning, hey, this is what the practice is, but you're seeing this is what she experienced while doing the same practice as she's suggesting that you do.
Ritual. Beautiful.
And so I'd like to read, by the way, which will be a first again for the show, at least the first chapter of the foreword. And then there's another chapter which I really like. We might read that in the middle of the show.
Go on.
So let me take the glasses off. I too have stood on the outside of life looking in. I too would like the courage to show up and let myself be seen. But first I have to figure out who I am. Writing helps me do that. I don't know if I'll ever totally figure me out. The good news is that I'm getting closer and closer to having the courage to let myself be seen. And I give a lot of credit to journaling. Wow. And that's, when we talk about the tips and the tools that one uses for their spiritual journey, we're kind of agnostic, right? There is no one tool that will set you free. No. Although a lot of people would like to convince you that the one tool that they've harnessed is that one. And what I've seen is that Donna is owning her experience with this tool. And what I found really sweet, and this is going, maybe I'll read one more quote.
I liked it. Go on.
Yeah. I've been doing reading for the audio of the last letter. So that's the reason why I'm getting used to reading them. The number one reason I journal is to listen to the deepest part of me and to gain clarity on what I believe underneath what I think I believe. I journal because I'm easily distracted. Some people can figure things out through their thought processes alone. My mind wanders so easily that I need the physical act of writing or drawing or photographing to help me focus. I need the involvement of pen and paper to stick to the point. If I don't have that, my thinking mimics my internet searching. One thing leads to another, circles through a dozen distractions. A couple of hours pass and I'm no closer to an answer.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to that when my mind is in turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel helpless in the turmoil and I can't seem to, not even the breath will help me in those moments.
Yeah.
Grab a pen and paper and there'll be so resistance, like the journey to grab a chair, sit behind the desk, open the book. I'm going to go wash the dishes. I'm going to go like, Bambo, sit down, take the pen and I'll start writing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you'll be like, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. I'm so resisting. This is fucking bullshit. And I'll just spit everything out. And at some point, after doing 2 A4s, it just starts to flow. Like underneath all that resistance, like I might even start crying.
Yeah.
And then I transition to the last letters, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you transition. And I'm sure Donna and we haven't spoken about the last letters, but we'll get into that. So that is for me, the prep to Donna, and the stories we'll get into are very intimate. And of course, we'll see how far we want to dig into, how journaling helped her deal with some of her own trauma in her life. But we'll welcome her on.
Should we bring her on?
Certainly we bring her on.
Are you sure?
Maybe. She'd like to stay off camera, I believe. She'd enjoy the hour if we just talked about her and didn't have her on, I guess.
Right, exactly.
I was trying to do a little bit of psychology there, but hello, Donna. Welcome.
Hi. Oh, it's nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming. How did it feel when you heard that reflection back around how we kind of experience your work?
Oh my gosh, it felt good. It really did feel good. I mean, that's exactly what I hope the book will do, is to touch people and to, find the people that need to find it.
Did you notice like the thing I mentioned earlier, when we make a decision to write, there's the prescriptive way of writing, which says these are the things you need to do do. And then there's the, now let me show you behind the curtain. And so how was that managed by you? How did you sort of navigate that?
I was very aware of that, that I do not like prescriptive anything. This is the way to do it, and these are the steps. And so I was very, very aware of writing in a way that was more of an invitation. And that's what I hope I conveyed.
Yeah, I was worried you weren't going to go there, because in the first chapter you wrote, I went through difficult things.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh no, she's not going to skip over what those difficult things are. But then when I read in the later chapter, you dove right into it.
Yeah.
It
didn't make sense to talk about that type of journaling without showing what it could do.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense to just say, try this, and this, and it'll work. Take my word for it.
The one thing I've learned about journaling, and I learned a lot from what I would equate to journaling, because as you may or may not be aware, I went on this tour of the U.S.
Yes.
And I asked, 60 groups of people to write. And then what I would ask them to write was to say, first I started thinking that I'd ask them to write a letter to someone that they loved, as if that person might not be there tomorrow. So really like ask them to hone into the urgency of this moment. But it shifted very quickly to whatever you feel called to write to.
Yeah.
And I noticed that broadening it put like it let the air out of the balloon because people could actually see what they were called to write to, and it wasn't necessarily a person that they felt might be gone tomorrow.
Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to know, like, kind of from your side, when you wrote, the thing you mentioned, which I found to be really so sort of beautiful, is that when we go into any practice, journaling, or Bambos has his morning rituals that he'll even go into cold baths. What I see is that in some ways, it's creating a spaciousness for us to sort of look into ourselves. And I saw obviously in your writing that this practice offered that for you. So what is it about journaling that specifically you say, wow, this helped me, as opposed to maybe other things you might have also done?
Okay. Okay, can I use an example of?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the hard things that I've go back to again and again is shadows and archetypes, and picking out seeing what hooks you in somebody else is often an indicator of a shadow in you. And so those are hard, to say, oh my gosh, that person just gets under my skin. And then to turn the mirror around and say, uh-oh, what am I not seeing in myself? And so the way the journaling helped me with that was to actually personify those shadows. Sometimes I even name them. My wicked witch is named Hildegard. And see what they're wearing and see what their body language is telling me. And the more I can personify that, I can see how it plays out in me, because that is a part of me, but to get a clearer picture of it. So.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're always, we spend a lot of time talking about how we objectify and project onto others.
Yes.
And how oftentimes in that act of judgment, it's an aspect of ourself that we're judging, clearly.
That's right. That's right.
So, and I mean, it might sound like a horrible thing to say, but like I will even look at an individual that many people project onto negative thoughts, say, for instance, the current president of America.
Yeah.
And then say, so what is it that by you doing that, you don't see qualities that you would need in order to be successful in your own life?
Right.
And you should see, like, I will be, just slaughtered, because in some ways it's so easy to create the persona and then just latch on negative thoughts instead of seeing, okay, there's a behavior and then there's a consequence, and then see that that's an impersonal state of mind, and then say, what is it about that behavior which may work, and what is it about that won't work, or what are the consequences?
Right. Yeah, and that gets into the the positive and negative aspects of like an archetype.
Yeah.
Every archetype has both positive and negative aspects, and we can hone in on either saying, oh, the rebel is this way, or the rebel is that way, and actually the rebel is both ways.
Oh, beautiful.
And it depends on the circumstance, and sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not. And then we judge by the consequence rather than looking at the behavior itself.
Yeah. Because sometimes, as weird as it might sound, a behavior that would seem to be deplorable in a context actually is most suitable.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's really hard concept I've seen people to grasp, is that it's context related and not just programmatically the wrong thing to do.
Well, the one I use in the book is the gambler and the risk taker. A risk taker, we all know people that have just taken these huge risks and been, hugely successful. And we admire them and, put them on a pedestal. And yet those are the same characteristics that are the compulsive gambler.
Yeah.
And if
Oh,
he
wow.
loses big, we shame him
Yeah.
or her,
Yeah. I like to celebrate those people, actually. Even the losers, because I'm always saying in some way, it's the act of the doing where we're
Yeah.
successful, not in the outcome, because
Right.
that's when the individual is living their pure kind of taking the risk. Because for some people, you would agree that I'm sure that there's a predisposition to gambling.
Uh-huh.
And then in others, they have to overcome the insecurity of gambling.
Yes.
And there's a beauty in that kind of, if someone isn't predisposed to be comfortable with the gamble, then my wife and I have this talk all the time, by the way, because she's predisposed to being a non-gambler. She's in the finance industry.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
all she is about mitigating downside risk. That's the words I hear all
Okay.
the
Yeah, yeah.
mitigating downside risk. And I'm laughing because I'm always in the world of what's the furthest if we took away, if we didn't think in any limitation, then what would we be able to explore and see?
Yeah.
And before we even sort of get to the phase 2 of those questions, she'll start to say, yeah, but you can't do that because.
Because yes, I know. Yes, I
Mhm.
think yes. My
Yeah.
husband and I have had similar discussions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love it because I laugh at it and say to her, because I'm not so uptight about it. So I'll say, babe, do you understand when that happens, this is the consequence? So we don't get in arguments. It's more like we heighten awareness that that's the process
Okay.
that's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Donna,
Yeah, please.
Yes.
before it becomes a monologue.
Thank you.
I'm actually wanting to go back a little bit. I didn't read the book. I just read a little bit some of the highlights.
Okay.
What was the journey you took from potentially a situation you had to sitting down, taking the pen and writing? Like, what was that journey you took?
Oh, wow. Well, okay. So my primary defense mechanism has always been to stay as busy as I can be. And that started in high school, to just fill up my calendar and be in everything I could be in and keep busy. And as I talk about in the book, the scariest thing for me was an empty square on my calendar. That I was next Tuesday, I didn't have a thing on my calendar. Oh, yikes. That's scary. And the only thing scarier was if there wasn't anything on Wednesday either. It's like
Mm.
I was scared to death of not being busy because that's when I would just go down what I called going down the well. And so that did me well. I mean, I achieved a lot. I had a great, successful career. I raised kids. On and on and on and on. Okay, so then you get to retirement and your kids are gone, and all of a sudden you do have time that you got to figure out what to do with. But this was not just a transition type thing. This was a looking at a defense mechanism that I had used my entire life. And I have journaled all my life, but at this point it was a desperation. It was like, I have got to get to the bottom of this, or I'm going to be sad, angry, depressed old woman.
Wow.
And I did seek professional help. And she was the one that taught me the first chapter is on the 4-day rite. And she was the one that assigned that to me. And I had just heard an interview with James Pennybacker on NPR, and he's the psychologist in Austin, Texas, who developed this method. And he has worked with a lot of people with trauma, lots of different kinds of trauma, and has developed this whole writing process of, you write for 4 days in a row, and you have to write for at least 20 minutes, and no editing, no stopping, just write. And whatever comes. So you pick your issue, and then you follow through for 4 days in a row. And so my counselor, Elaine, assigned me this for this. This was a long-standing issue from childhood. And so it was hard. It was really hard. And I go into more detail in the book, but it also broke through some defenses and some blind spots, and and what happened was, okay, I come from a very intellectual family, so everything is up here in the head, figure it out, logic, all of that. So what was never, I wouldn't say never, but hardly, it was very much put down and overlooked, were emotions. And that was what was stuck in me, were some really hard, deep emotions that somehow had to come out, because otherwise I was just going to busy myself to death. And believe me, I could do that. I would stay busy, busy, busy until I got physically sick. And then I'd be sick for 2 weeks. And then I would get back on the treadmill and busy, 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 and run, run, run like the rat on the treadmill until I would get sick again. And I didn't know how to relax. I didn't know how to step back and say, there's got to be a better way. And so it was writing, and it was particularly this method of James Pennybaker's that really broke through that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. In the beginning, when you were sharing, I really felt in my body the contraction in my heart as a sensation.
Wow. And that's what it was. It was constricted emotions, really deep emotions. And like I say, when I started writing, I don't know about the second day of that, I was angrier than I've ever been in my life. And I was saying words on those papers that I didn't know I could say. I didn't know that I could, vomit. That's what, part of it was just vomiting.
Yeah.
When you're writing, like sometimes I'll write things in my journal like, fuck, I do not ever want anyone to read this.
I know. I was like, yeah. Okay. So there's part in the very first part of the book, I say, that's the first thing you got to figure out.
Yeah.
If you're going to be honest and open, which is the only reason to journal, you got to figure out what you're going to do with these journals. And, for me, it was like making a commitment, getting a commitment from somebody I trusted to say, if I'm killed in a car wreck tomorrow, please go to my closet, pull out all those journals and just get rid of them somehow. Because there's things that you say and that you've got to be able to say, but you've got to have that assurance that, you're not going to hurt somebody. You're not going to die and then leave this journal that you're still screaming and yelling at someone.
Yeah.
And that's not the end of the story. It's only part of the story.
Yeah.
So I have that agreement with my daughter. If I die, go to that closet and get rid of my journals. So,
like anyone that would take that seriously would mean they would take your thoughts seriously, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But there has to be that confidentiality to be able to be honest.
Yeah. In your book, you write about the relationship with your father, and it was funny because the story you told about the dress, and it would be nice to share a bit about that, because I can certainly relate to that in my own life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So my father was an engineer. He had been a naval officer in World War II. He worked for the Atomic Energy Commission. It was all secret, and he was very, very smart. He was intellectual, and he was a perfectionist. And I don't think, but he was very cold. I wanted his attention, and I wanted it in a positive way, as any child wants their parents' attention in a positive way. Um, the story about the dress is that, you know, money was tight. There were 5 kids at home and 2 in college, and but it wasn't that tight. I mean, we could have been a little bit, I don't know. Anyway, I made all my own clothes in high school, and I always looked for remnants that I could pick up cheap. And we always had a closet full of material. Okay, so I'm getting ready to go to this dance, and I had found a piece of fabric on a remnant table. I think I picked it up for $2. It was a gold lame, and it just sparkly, just beautiful. And I already had a zipper, and I had thread and all that. So I made the dress for $2.50. And it was the style of the day, and it was just cute as it could be. And as I talk about in the book, I had long blonde hair at that time, and I had it piled on my head, and I came out in this beautiful party dress and my party shoes, and I stood in front of my dad, and I said, "Dad, what?" And I wanted him to be proud of me. Not only it was a pretty dress, but I had made it for $2.50. So I come out and I stand in front of him, and I twirl around, and I say, "Dad, what do you think of my new dress? I made it for $2.50. And he looked at it and he said, "Well, it looks like a gunny sack."
Which means what?
A gunny sack is what feed comes in to feed your horses.
Feed your horses.
It's just a straight, and that was the style of the day. It was a, just a kind of free flowing. And I was like, if he had punched me in the stomach, it wouldn't have hurt anymore.
Yeah.
It was like he didn't understand that kind of, I was fishing for a compliment, obviously.
Yeah.
I wanted him to say something, "Wow, you're beautiful. Wow, I can't believe you made the dress." There's any number of things he could have said, even if he didn't like the dress.
Yeah.
It looks like a gunny sack.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah, when I read that in the story, there's so often the story I'll share about when I graduated from college. My dad came, and I had, I do the walk. I have my diploma. It took me some work because I traveled for a year, came back just to get this diploma. It was very important to him, and he said to me, "That piece of paper, $1, you can buy yourself a cup of coffee."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was no celebration, no
Right.
understanding context, understanding that, to some degree, in doing this, there was a desire, as you would say, just to be seen and recognized and appreciated.
Yeah. And that little incident by itself may not sound like much, but it was just a accumulation of things like that kind of built up, and then I had to just stuff down.
Like, how did the little girl, like you say, it might seem not a big thing, but I'm still there. Like, how did your body take that in?
I had already gotten really good at hiding my emotions. From the early age, if I got upset, I was told to go to my room, and I could come out when I got it under control. So I had learned not to cry. I had learned not to show emotions. And I was saved by, the bell ringing and my boyfriend at the door to pick me up. So, I could kind of put that behind me, and I probably forgot it. It's one of those things that didn't come up until I began the really deep journaling part. It's just your mind can do amazing things to protect you. We've got defense mechanisms that just come to our aid really quickly, which we all need. But at the same time, when they take over and we become those defense mechanisms, that's where the problem is.
Yeah. We don't
You
even
know,
recognize it, of course.
no,
Mm.
You know,
There's
I like to say I'm the person that you need in an emergency because I go totally. Um, I don't feel the emotions. I just do what needs to be done, and it's 24 hours later that I will fall apart.
Mm. It could very well be that was the behavior that your dad also had, of course, being in the
Oh,
Navy and
absolutely. Yeah,
needing to,
yeah,
get things done.
yeah. It could be, and I think
Mm.
that's true.
There's something that I found beautiful in journaling that I discovered in the trip when I would write my own
Hmm.
letters, because on the trip I wrote 60 letters each day. And what I noticed was that the beginning of the trip, by the way, I would like to just quickly interrupt. I see you're kind of feeling into some
Oh,
emotion.
no,
So
just because I felt that and I can't hold the tears back.
no, I like that. I
Oh,
just want to make sure that you to
thank you,
be there
Bombas.
for you at the moment instead of whatever I have to say.
No, it's good.
Yeah, okay. I'd lose my thoughts. That's not whatever's in front of me is like the most important thing, and then I forget whatever I was saying.
You were saying about
The conscious, yeah.
journaling.
And
Yeah.
what I noticed, and this is something that I don't think one would ever understand unless they had the experience for themselves, is that, as Bambo said, I needed to write 2 pages of I don't want to write, fuck this, I'm annoyed with this shit, I don't know why I'm doing this. And then all of a sudden it's like there's a space hidden behind that, which just is like this flowing
Yep.
deeper. Oh, it's a deepening. It's like the bottom drops out, and all of a sudden you're writing things. And what I've often said is I work less with the writing and more with the speaking. So,
Okay.
and I have a feeling that's probably associated with I don't have a lot of shame.
Okay.
So I'll speak out.
No filter, huh?
Well, I do filter, but when it comes to all my feelings, I see all feelings are human to all of us. So
Yeah.
I'm not shameful of any experience, because I believe if all of us looked inward, we'd see it's also true for us.
Uh-huh.
So I'll speak out and then listen to what I'm saying to hear if it resonates or not caring if it's true. Like,
Oh,
I'm not
okay.
trying to write a story. I'm actually, and what I'm taking away also from Bambos having spoken earlier and having read what I read of your book, is that in some ways that writing is almost like an invitation to the subconscious to show itself,
Absolutely. That's
and then
perfect.
and then see what like comes up from that. It's almost like I write to see what I write, not that it's true, almost to discover what I feel like as I write it.
Yes. That's perfect. I'm
I
going to
can
use that.
high five you right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've seen that
Yeah.
that's different ways of engaging like the subconscious, because it's a hard thing. I mean, I've only recently started to investigate into psychedelics, just
Mm-hmm.
because that's another avenue into another part of the being.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like when we're going on any journey, how far are we allowing ourselves to dig into areas which aren't as comfortable?
Right. Yeah.
And I'd say, of course, for you, Bambos has done something else, which is another form of this, where he's done an hour-long live session online, where he doesn't have any specific thing to discuss. He'll sit sometimes and only cry for an hour, just live.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And
It's like bungee jumping into your soul.
yeah,
Wow.
and what I find in those exercises, there's a beauty in the let me allow the feeling to be fully lived without
Yeah.
judgment of it, and then see what I learned from the experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
That
And
really describes particularly the 4-day rites, because you just let whatever come with no judgment.
I'd love to segue. We might go to there again, but I'd love you to share, because I really loved the writing exercise with the people I admire and the ones I don't admire. And I'd love if you'd share I know we talked about archetypes, and I'm sure you'll bring them back
Yeah.
in, but I'd love for you to share a little bit of how that exercise works, because as I just read the description of it, I could just feel my body begin to tremble with this sort of beautiful, wow, this would be
Yeah.
fun to do.
Yeah, it is. It's really fun to do. Okay, so think about, I don't know, half a dozen people that you really admire, and then, write their names down, write the characteristics, describe them, say something about them. What is it about this person that you really, really like, admire, etc.? And do that, and then realize that those same traits that you have identified in those people are also in you. Mm. And the first time I did that exercise, it was just like, are you serious? Am I really like Michelle Obama and Brene Brown and, Naomi Nye? And
you look like Brene Brown.
Oh, yeah. Well, I really picked out people that were, oh my gosh, just wonderful, wonderful. And I thought about how they're all excellent communicators. They're, they're sexy. They are deep thinkers. Just these qualities that I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I could be like them. And then, and I can't remember where I first saw this exercise, but then, the next thing was, those traits that you are identifying are also in you. And I was like, are you kidding me? They're in me. That's me. And okay, so that feels pretty darn good. You just go, oh, wow, I'm in good company. Okay, but the second part of the exercise is you got to name a few people that just get under your skin, that you just, you just hate being with them. You hate reading about them. You hate, just, ugh. And so the way I have people do this one, and the way I do it, is don't spend a lot of time on that, because it can get depressing, because, and you know what's coming, those same traits that you identified are also in you. Oh,
hallelujah.
Yeah.
We're not perfect.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so it really does get to those, and it's what you want to feed. Are you going to feed the traits that you love, and maybe spend some time with the ones you don't like, and figure them out and accept them, but don't feed them.
What I liked is that you named all the people and the ones you liked, and you didn't name anyone in the ones you didn't like.
I didn't hear Trump, for example.
Well, he's in there.
But I mean, that's the same thing that we're always looking at, is that as soon as we project onto the person, we lose part of our strength, because we don't get to see where that's part of us. And that's the unconscious projection are the most dangerous ones.
Yeah.
Because if we can't see behavior, then we don't actually have the opportunity to see it as an impersonal thing. We actually personalize it, and we get stuck over and over again. By the way, we have some comments.
Yeah.
Okay. We have Magda, who's basically our very vivid or avid listener, watcher.
A hug for Donna.
She's sending a hug.
Thank
She's
you.
in Austria, so she's sending a hug. And I can guarantee if she says it, she's really feeling it. She wouldn't send that.
Thank you.
And then we have Bolalang, who is my new dear friend, who basically writes a quote from each one of the chapters of my book and posts it so people can have a dialogue, which is really brought me great joy. And he has a question.
Does journaling need a book? Can it be done with typing into a device?
Okay. Yeah. You do it whatever works for you. My sister-in-law types. She types every day. That's her writing. I have to use a journal, because I'm going to do scribbles, and I'm going to do, different colors of ink and all that kind of stuff. But no, if typing into a computer works for you, do it.
There was one other thing that you also do, which I thought was really quite beautiful. We haven't discussed that yet, is that in some ways you're doing mandalas.
Yes.
And the beauty of the 4-day was what I found really intriguing is that, I'm very much a person who goes into their feelings. So I see, how does something affect me? And when I do anything with the mandala, I experience the mandala as a meditation.
Yes.
So I don't, when someone says I'm doing a mandala and it's connected to the journaling, and in some ways I feel like it's in me, it's connected to almost like a repetitive exercise, which
Yes.
turns off the thinking part of my brain,
Absolutely.
and therefore it's almost like what arises when I'm not thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. The 4-day rites and the mandala practice started at the exact same time. And I had just read about Carl Jung using mandalas to get at the subconscious. And so I was very intrigued, and I got on the computer and I, did one of those searches, and I just happened to stumble upon a site that talked about photo mandalas. Well, as a photographer, I was just drawn in immediately. And what I would do with the writing was I would write and I always wrote for at least an hour. It wasn't just 20 minutes. And then I would go to the computer and create a photo mandala. And there was things that came out in the mandalas they kind of bypassed that verbal stage. They just went straight to, oh my gosh, and I, like the one of my father, I got to the end and I'd done a mandala each day. I'd done the writing each day. I'd done the mandala each day. And on the last day, as I was looking at the mandalas, I found these little bitty hearts in the one that I call the anger mandala. And I sat there and cried. It was kind of like, oh my gosh, my father did love me. He loved all of us. He just didn't know how to express it. He had his own pains and his own hurts and his own things he had been through, which were pretty tough. And there were just these tiny little hearts. And I saw that and I was like, wow. And it spoke to my heart.
Yeah. I was telling, and there was a moment when my dad was very abusive as a kid. He wasn't only not present to be verbally abusive. And I remember when my mentor said, "Why did he do that?" And I said, "Because he loved me." And then I just cried.
Oh my God.
And then from that moment, I couldn't see his actions in the same light anymore.
Yeah.
Because I told myself the same story over and over again, because to vilify him was the pattern that made my life much easier, because then I didn't have to take any responsibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I can certainly identify with that moment when you say, "Well, he did it because he loved." It's almost like it's like you can't even see the same picture. You can't tell the story in the same way because your brain doesn't allow it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a chapter in the next book where the woman who my mom was killed by a drunk driver.
Right. Yeah.
And I wrote a letter to her. And as I was writing, I had this struggle because it was a letter to say forgive. And I was struggling with the idea of forgiveness, because to forgive would mean that she was guilty. So now I have to say, I forgive you of being guilty.
Oh, okay.
And in some ways it shifted, because I saw, well, I forgive myself for never having fully seen you.
Yeah, that's true. And that's what I came to, was I didn't feel like I ever fully saw my father.
Yeah.
I saw what I knew as a child, who was easily hurt. And I never came to know him as a real person.
Yeah, and what's fascinating for me in that journey is we have an experience as a child. We then turn into an adult and we diminish the thoughts like, oh, we shouldn't feel bad about that. And in a way, it's this weird paradox, is that I have to allow the feelings of the childhood pain to exist so that I can let them be free.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was another thing I came to, is I had to forgive myself. And that's a hard one. It's like, it's easy. It's easier to, number one, blame somebody else. And then number two, beat yourself up for not, standing up or making different choices. And then to say, the only thing left is forgiveness. And that's where we need to go.
Yeah. I've got some questions. I don't know how you are. I always like to ask because sometimes I jump so quick. Bambos doesn't have a chance to jump in. So I always like to take a pause and ask sometimes. So you got anything?
Shall we do our traditional breathing in?
Yeah.
Could I say something about the mandalas? Something else
Obviously.
about the mandalas? Okay.
Please.
So the other thing the wonderful thing that came out of that period, it was, now it's been about a dozen years ago, was that I began creating mandalas and pairing them with inspirational writing. And at first I used other people's writing, quotes or poems or whatever. And then I started writing them myself. And so for the last 10 years, I have done what I call a mandala message that goes out to my mailing list every Wednesday. So it was not just that practice that helped me through the really tough writing, but it has expanded to be just an inspiration for me, and I get pretty good feedback from other people too. But it's been going on for 10 years now.
I've got a really interesting question for me. So you are a bit of a paradox in the sense that, not that we all aren't a bit of a paradox, but I'd like to be more precise. It feels like you put yourself in the world, and yet it's the least comfortable place for you to be.
Oh my gosh, how long have we known each other? 30 minutes and you're nailing me? That is so true. It is.
So how is that?
Well, I can do it through my art and through my writing, but I'm very uncomfortable just, going out and speaking or being in a group or, anything. How did you figure that out? I mean, that just blows me away.
I mean, you can see, Bambos, I've spoken more on this podcast than I would normally speak.
Yeah.
I would say. And Bambos at some point said, let's not make this a monologue. And,
right.
and in some ways, I was doing that intuitively to make sure that you felt comfortable.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want you to feel on the spot, and I didn't want you to feel like you had to answer questions. And so there was a part of me that sort of had that, let's let her slowly come in and find her place here.
Yeah.
And so there's a when you'll respond, it's almost like I'd want you to shout out "fuck" in the microphone. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I did say shit, but Bambos was talking at the same time, so you didn't hear it.
But you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like you talk about the shadow.
Yeah.
And the shadow for me is anywhere where I feel myself not capable of just. Like, we do this show every day. We don't, like, today was, I read your book, so I underlined things. But in general, we don't have any game plan for an hour.
Wow. I could never do that.
And I would suggest you could.
You really?
Could, yes, under the condition that you would feel like whatever shows up is great.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't know what to do. So Bambo says, let's just take a breath.
Yeah.
And then we just let the sort of spaciousness come in, and then we find whatever feels right at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just allowing your vulnerability, your humanity to be part of the flow instead of trying to control it and having it to be a certain way or perfect. Or I need to give such good content so people will watch this and give me a lot of likes and a lot of validation.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys have nailed me.
Yeah, but the beauty is, and I want to celebrate you here, is that you are looking to say, I am not going to live in the shadows. So where am I comfortable not doing that and still being on my edge? So that's the question. Are you living on that edge of where I'm comfortable, or have you basically decided, no, I'm just not going to do anything because everything's a risk?
Yeah, no,
'Cause-
I am a risk taker. And I have put myself in roles that put me out in front of people. I've done that always. I mean, just
Yeah, but I'd like
but
to.
it's controlled. It's
I was going to say,
controlled.
but it's
Yes,
controlled,
yes,
and
it is.
so once you leave yourself vulnerable, I mean, for instance, I've got a question. Like, you write, you have 4 siblings?
Wow, I've got 6 siblings.
6 siblings. And now you've written things that are kind of intimate about your childhood and about how it was. And obviously there's 6 other people who have a different interpretation of events, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely, they do.
So
I've had one of them that say, "I will never read your book."
Yeah, I can imagine. And so, and what I'm saying to you, and this is where I want to celebrate you, is that to do that and know that that potential also exists isn't easy.
Right. No, and it's taken me a lifetime to get to that point.
Yeah.
You know. So, in a way, I was okay. This is being very vulnerable. I was very scared. I wanted to write this book. I wrote it a year ago. I wanted to, but it really was a long time coming before that. But I had been dreading some reactions, and I had to just send it to a couple people and say, "Here it is. Read it or don't, but it's coming out."
And you're in it.
And you're in it, by the way. Not directly, but
yeah.
But my version does disagree with yours, and but I'm not going to be worried about it anymore. I'm choosing not to be worried about it.
And I would suggest that it isn't when you said it was different. What was the wording you just used? I didn't quite. That each one experienced the same thing differently.
Yeah, right.
This is my experience.
Yeah,
that's my experience.
Yeah.
I actually do have a question for you.
Yeah.
But it will be backtracking.
Please.
Okay, we can do that.
When you shared about writing the people that you admire and the people that you kind of judge, like, oh my God, like in how it felt in my body, actually, I would really focus on the other part, on the shadows.
Yeah.
And I'll take it really deep in. Like, I'll feel it in my body, like I'll cry, and I'll like there's two people in my world. There's Charles, who was bullied and was a drug addict, who was hiding, he was lying. And then there's Bambos, who's a badass, and he's like a fucking king.
Yeah, okay. I like that.
And Charles will be the one that doesn't want to look in the mirror because he's scared. He's 5 years old. And Bambo is the one that holds him and lets him look in the mirror.
But I think the important thing about that is holds him.
Yeah.
That you're holding him.
Yeah. So
you've got to look, but I will hold you.
Yeah. So in a way, I was curious if you've, because you said that you don't want to go too deep. So to what degree do you allow that to be there?
I think I go pretty deep in my writing,
Bambos is pretty extreme. So when he goes into something, it's almost like you'd almost think of it like he's almost trying to torture himself. That's how I would, from an outside perspective.
I would say I'm squeezing the lemon and not letting any juice, and sometimes the peel also goes in.
And from his question, and I'm gonna rephrase, like, how far do you say you almost push yourself to this? Like, how far do you go over the edge?
I've gone over. That's a hard question.
Yeah, how do you measure that?
Yeah, how do you measure it? I think the shadow work, I have gotten pretty honest with myself. And it can be very painful to say, oh, this person just irritates the hell out of me. And and then to turn the mirror around and say, oh my God, I do that same thing. And then my next step is, whenever I have one of those insights, I go back through my entire life and go, oh my gosh, there it was, there it was, there it was, there it was. And it's painful. It's like, I thought I was perfect. I thought it was really, I didn't think I did those things. And it can take me down the well. I just don't stay down the well as long as I used to.
Yeah.
I know that it'll be 24 hours and I will claw my way out and say, that's a part of me. That's a part of me, but it's not all of me.
Yeah.
And it's not, and again, I have to get to the forgiveness stage. I think we do the best we can with the knowledge we have, with who we are at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to say, now I know better.
Yeah.
Now I'm growing, and it's this spiral of, coming back to that idea again and again and saying, I'm going a little bit deeper this time.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my gosh, I see it there. And that's okay. I'm human.
It's okay.
I find it fascinating how we judge the younger self from an older understanding.
Yes,
Just fascinating, as if we were that same person then as we are now. It's a really fascinating.
Yeah.
And also, what was really beautiful, my journey, Joanna Lovasio, she told me you had no choice back then.
You couldn't, you didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
You do what you can with what you know and who you are. And then you learn a little more and you do a little better. And you'll make a mistake today and a year from now you'll go, I could have had a V8,
I always tell people when I'm coaching them, and they kind of hate it at some point, but I always say, that's the best thing that could happen to you, when they're in the biggest suffering. Because what I noticed is that there was a pattern that they weren't wanting to look at.
Right, exactly. I think the universe sends you the same lesson over and over in different circumstances until you get it.
Until you get it.
No.
And if you don't get it the first time, it'll come back the second.
I know,
third.
yeah. It's like, okay, here you go again. Different people, different costumes, but same role.
We've got only a few more moments left, and I'd like to ask one final question, or one final, we'll see. But question is, if there's one thing you said, wow, this book gave you, what would that be?
Closure.
Yeah. Say that again.
Closure. To have the guts to put it out there, and and I didn't reveal everything. I didn't take my clothes off and stand there naked, but it was like, okay, I can at least go this far. And if what I've been through and the tools that I've used in so many different ways are helpful to somebody else, then I've done something. I've helped somebody else.
I'm always, when I hear you speak, I had this thing where there are no new problems in the world. So whatever you like looking at Andy's book, and I'm going to read your book now.
Yeah.
It's like when you write something and you share it, you go really deep and you just put everything out there in a way. You might say, who's going to read this? But
I know,
everyone that's having even the capacity to look 5% inside is going to resonate.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, because that's you do go through that too. It's like, okay, this was my story that helped me, but who cares? Who else would?
And that's funny, because I think at this phase of my life, as I mentioned, as we discussed a bit earlier, this programmatic way of teaching or writing or instructing others, I haven't found it appealing now. And the new book is called The Wounded Healer. And it's called The Wounded Healer because what I've seen is that you, in your journey of just allowing the wound to be, not having to fix it, not having to tell anyone how they have to fix their own, but just allowing yours to be seen, is actually the invitation for others to begin working on that in themselves.
Thank you. That's exactly what I hoped for.
Yeah.
So when is the second book coming out?
I've got some ideas. I'm working.
I have a feeling it'll be more associated with mandalas the next time around.
You nailed it. You nailed it again. God, you are so smart.
He is.
It is exactly. It is
Yeah.
exactly on mandalas.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you very much for being with us. Given
Thank
that,
you.
I hope you came out unscathed, knowing that you weren't necessarily looking forward to this.
Yeah, this was very fun. Very
Right.
fun. Thank you, both
Thank
of
you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Much love.
Much love. Bye.
Bye.
Ah, beautiful. Yeah. Donna Bearden. So for me, when we have these sort of talks, I really enjoy being with people who allow their scars to be seen and do it in a way that is this invitation to a sort of a more grounded space for others. And what I can see, especially for someone like Donna, is that it's even in some way so raw that for her to do it, it's even more risky and more vulnerable, which for me, I have even more gratitude for her taking that risk. Yeah.
If you want to, if you write a book like that and obviously you want to support people who are living something similar, then you need to show up.
Yeah.
And one of these ways was the podcast, right?
Yeah. Or you don't need to show up, because what you can do is you can write a programmatic approach to something and never show yourself in that writing.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not the kind of writing that pulls either of us in. I just want to look and make sure that we give, for those that still might be interested in the book, it's Finding More Me, Journaling to Go Soul Deep, and Donna Bearden.
Just leave that there, not type it in the comments.
Yeah. So that was Thursday's show. Thank you for being with us. Tomorrow's show, we have Kathy Delahunty, and she has got an incredible story. Friend had passed away, and she was gifted 7 bags of yarn. And she took those 7 bags of yarn and turned it into a lifelong pursuit of, what do we call it? Not needling, but knitting clothes for the homeless. And that's now the biggest knitting community for homeless in the world, which is it's just a remarkable story.
And Sunday
has got me so excited. I think I might be the only one that's this excited, but Juan Man, who founded the Free Hugs campaign, he's going to be on the show. And he was such an inspiration for me so long ago. I think that there's probably 2 generations of people who haven't been familiar with his work. But for me, he was the pioneer in breaking down this barrier of touch. Because when he stood with the Free Hug sign, it was not considered normal to invite embrace. So he was really at the forefront of that new way of saying we need touch. And he did it in Australia. And those of you that know my experiences in Australia, they aren't necessarily filled with a lot of men that are wanting to have emotional connection. So it speaks even more to him.
There's one more thing. Tomorrow we're going to be interviewed, right?
Oh yeah, we also are interviewed, but I think that will be recorded. But one of our people that was on will be interviewing us, and we'll give you those details as well. Yeah, we love that, man. So thank you for joining us
on another episode of A
Wonderful Chaos.